Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
James Estes Abston, Jr., Thomas Edward Adams, Kenneth Edward Aylshire, Robert Clyde Allen, Ramiro Alvarado, Harold Joseph Alwan, Kenneth Soares Andrade, Darrell Wayne Aspey, Marvin Douglas Avery, William Francis Ayres, Ronald Lester Babcock, Frank Martin Baca, Richard Reed Ballantyne, Bobby John Barcina, Ernest Eugene Beam, John Edward Berger, Danny Clarence Barrier, Matt Clifford Boblett, Richard Stephen Bovio, Robert Alvin Brothen, Roscoe Edward Bryant, Ernest Jack Buckaloo, Douglas John Burdick, Joseph Frank Berinda, Jr., Rocky August Burns, Roy Neal Burris, Bert Ellis Burton, Sam William Busby, Cecil Floyd Bush, John Richard Cassiopo, Marshall Lee Callender, Ramiro Cardenas, Michael John Carley, James Patrick Carney, Jr., Willard Gilson Cohen, Rodney D. Collins, Richard John Connolly, Wilson Lee Cook, Dennis Lynn Craver, Terry Lee Crawford, Jesus Rosas Cruz, Enrique Salas Cruz, John Anthony Cookell, Jr., Paul Anthony Cumberland, James Leon Cunningham, Zbigniew Joseph Delenta, David Lee Danowski, Freddie Carvial de Four, Craig Norman de Michel, Bruno Walter de Mata, Donald Gary Detmer, John Edward Dillard, Charles Willie Dilks, Charles Melvin Ellison, Jesus M. Encarnacion Colon, John Henry Erbs, Donald J. Fisher, David Orsten Fierstadt, Gary Leroy Fuller, Johnny Joe Gallardo, Ronald Jackson Gebby, Mike Mora Godines, Santiago Rodriguez Gonzalez, Edward Stephen Graves,
Stanley Edwin Graves, Jr., Richard Eugene Greer, Robert Lee Hare, Robert Joseph Hall, Gary Van Hall, Donald Hall, Theodore S. Hamner III, James Paul Hanlon, John Francis Hartzheim, David William Horishko, James Benedict Hurd, Paul Elroy Helsel, Jr., Arthur Weinman Herod, Raymond Curtis Hetzler, Jose Antonio Hinojosa, Donald Mullally Horton, J. H. Houston, James Ray Hubbard, Litchfield Patterson Huey, John William Jackson, Dennis Wayne Jacobs, Scott Nelson Jacobson, Donald Melvin Jennings, Jerome Michael Jones, Robert Henry Osborne Jones, Donaciano Francis Kaufman, Raymond O. Kennedy, Rick Edward Kopka, Ronald Terry Crancy, Michael Stephen Kravchuk, David Allen Larson, Glenn Carl Lano, Edward Norman Letchworth, Robert Philip Levin, Larry Jean Lewis, James Terry Leibnitz, James Lawrence Leon, Joe Long, Jose Raimundo Lozano, Lawrence Frank Lubansky, Howard Louis Lucas Jr., Henry Madison Jr., Abelardo Malave Rios, Manuel Martinez, Adolfo Martinez, Lawrence Beverly McLeod, Robert Henry McCullum, Ronald Lee McCormick, Louis Henry McFarland, Mark Scott Miles, Paul Lloyd Milius, Paul James Miller, Robert E. Mino, Daniel James Minor, Sammy Franklin Monroe, Fred Mooney, William Hiram Moore, Earl Thomas Moore, Jr., Elroy Morris, Masashi Nakashimo, Ralph Eugene Nathan, Emilio Ninaisen Nidedog, Douglas Ellsworth Nichols, Edward Leroy Niebuhr,
Charles Stephen Norris, Frederick J. O'Connor, Jr., Daniel Lee Overwright, James Taylor Pace, Gilbert Swain Palmer, Timothy Eugene Perry, Larry Wynn Pettet, Robert Elton Petchka, Jr., James Edward Paiva, William Stephen Potter, Martin Robert Powers, Robert Lawrence Powers, Daniel Vaughn Proctor, Francis John J. Pruitt, Percy Isaiah Pugh, Francisco Quintanilla, Jr., Fernando Mendoza Quintero, Larry Stephen Rainey, Roland Woolderidge Ray, Joseph John Riley, Harold McGill Renwick, Jr., Donald Ray Rhodes, Rodney Allen Rote, Michael Ray Rommel, William Wakefield Roush, George Rowland, Jr., Rufin J. Satterwhite, Jr., Bernard Jacob Souse, Jr., John Paul Scogins, Mitchell Francis Seck, Melvin Lewis Sellers, Milton Shapiro, Michael Eugene Sims, Otis Beverly Sink, Larry Eugene Sinks, Arthur Clarence Sisko, Jr., Christopher James R. Six, Donald Wayne Smith, Gary Kenneth Smith, Dwayne Harold Snyder, George Edgar Speck, James Maynard Spence, Ronald Wade Stafford, Theodore Arthur Stamfley, Charles Hubert Stanley, Virgil Stanley, Jr., Frank Lynn Statton, Teddy Wayne Steelman, James Louis Steinkirchner, Cornelius Willie Strassner, Conrad Francis Straub, Craig Everett Swagler, Gary Lee Schwartz, Rudolph Swoop, Charles Albert Tavares, Jose Rafael Tavares, Robert Thomas Taylor, Gordon Ray Teftteller, Cornelius Terry, Walter Reed Thomas, Kevin Garner Thorne, Charles Rupert Tricker, Jimmy Michael Trollinger, Louis J. Trout, Jr.,
Arthur Joseph Turner, Anthony Nicholas Valente, Donald Thomas Van Horn, Gary Lawrence Vanderbrook, Clarence Varnado, Travis Gary Walden, Vernon Lewis Walker, Willie Lewis Wallace, Jider Jackson Warren, Brian Charles Weiner, Richard Dennis Welsh, David Stewart Whitman, Charles Edward Williams, Neil Stephen Williams, Thomas Thawson Wright, Thomas Clay Wright, James Dominio Youngham, Ronald Peter Uaz, Lyle David Zacher, Ronald Lee Zempel,